The pandemic changed so many things in so many different aspects of our lives, including the way we commute. A panel on transportation scenarios for a post-pandemic world will explore important changes in citizens' behaviors, the factors driving them, and what this means for the cities of tomorrow. But first, a community announcement on the sustainable last mile presented by Accenture will focus on the actions the last mile ecosystem needs to take in order to effect real, sustainable change. And if you crave more collaborative activities, don't forget to look at our working sessions.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Last Mile Community Session. My name is Andre Ferrand. I'm the Global Managing Director for the Post and Parcel industry at Accenture. And I'm also accompanied by my colleague, Sarah Banks, who is the Managing Director for Freight and Logistics, also with Accenture. Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm great, Andre. Wonderful to be with you in this group today.
Well, Sarah, you and I are here to talk about the last mile community, and that's part of the Movin'On experience. We will share with you what we've done over the past year, what we've found in terms of the outputs of our workshops and our research, what are some of the key findings. And we're going to end with a call to action for anyone that's passionate about achieving a faster, cheaper, greener last mile. You might wonder, so why is this important? Well, it's important because if you talk about the last mile, for many retailers, this is, and for many delivery companies, this represents about 53% of the total cost of a shipment. So it is very expensive. It's the most expensive part. And when you look at it, it's the one that consumes the most energy and is arguably the most inefficient on a per unit basis. The second thing is, if we do nothing around last mile to improve its sustainability, the carbon emissions will grow by 32% between now and 2023, just with the growth of e-commerce alone. So we cannot change this by continuing with our current practices. So what I'll do now is I'll hand this over to Sarah, who will talk to you about what we've done over the past year. Sarah?
Thanks, Andre. And I think to get us started, as we go into this topic in a little bit more detail, we'll take a walk down memory lane and look at where we've been over a timeline of the last 12 months. So last year in June 2020, in the Movin'On summit that took place, this topic was very much top of mind. Obviously sustainability, but also the understanding of this exponential growth in last mile was there and really an important topic. Coming out of that, we had the initiative to bring a group of 26 experts across the different areas of value in the last mile ecosystem together to be able to have a working session on this topic, covering a very important piece of this topic. And I'll get into that in just a moment. Following that, though, we were able to take advantage of the outputs of this session and feed it into a study that Accenture had initiated on the impacts of sustainable last mile and things that companies could do to make a difference, which then brings us to a year later where we're able to share this with you in the June 2021 Movin'On Summit. So that's just some contextual context before we take a deep dive into what we did as part of the community. So in this community, we sought with these experts to answer the question around the ability to collectively reshape the last mile delivery operations and the experience for good. Obviously in a post-COVID context, because that has made a dramatic impact around the world of last mile demand that we need to support. So this group of 26 experts took a look at this burning question. We then in that group looked at it from 3 different lenses. And as you'll see on this slide, we had 3 themes for each of these lenses. The first was looking at it from a partnership and ecosystem perspective. The second was looking at it from a retailer's lens, which is a very unique lens. And then finally looking at it from a delivery company lens. And again, very important players in understanding impacts around sustainability and last mile. We came up with 6 conclusions that actually were in common across these 3 different groups. The first was this commitment that we need to have a future vision and realize that vision together. We need to have something that aligns us all to be able to take the right steps forward. The second was around that vision to be able to solve for a balanced set of priorities, because not every participant has the same needs and expectations. So we need to balance those to come up with, again, an aligned way forward. The third area was around using data and the importance of data to pool it collectively in order to be able to create better insights and better inform, particularly around decisions that could have an impact to the sustainability of the last mile. The fourth, which couples very well with the third, was around the broader use of advanced technology. So even the elements around the growth of green fleets were viewed by this working group as being something that will be needed to expand and accelerated to be able to make a difference. Just touching on the last 2 here, the first being on sharing and adapting of infrastructure. So a lot of good interest and renewed commitment about making investments in things such as lockers or inventory locations that, drive more proximity, or even vehicle sharing, things that we can do more of to optimize that. And then I think the last point just to raise here is around the importance of the local regulatory needs. So it does take a village of people to be able to make the right outcomes, but that local regulatory role, what we do with local governments, is going to be very important to make a difference. So with all that context in mind, coming from the working group, what we were able to do was tie this into existing research that Accenture was running on this topic to come up with some very powerful insights and conclusions. So I'll hand it back to you, Andre, to walk the group through that.
Great. So when we're talking about the research, what we wanted to do is to prove to ourselves, is it possible to achieve a faster, greener, cheaper last mile, and to quantify some of the outcomes, right? Something you can't really do in a workshop. So what we did is, with the help of Frontier Economics, we've developed a detailed econometric model that essentially estimated the impact of a new delivery model that we'll get into, called local fulfillment centers. And what we did is we decided to take 50% of all of the future e-commerce growth, and take all of those deliveries, take 50% of those, and assume that they would be locally fulfilled. Okay, that would be, I guess, one of the components of our model. We modeled this for 3 cities. Now we picked Sydney, London, and Chicago. And the reason why we picked these 3 cities is that they were representative of very large urban centers, typically the type of situation that many of our large customers face. And the econometric model looked at the impacts of local fulfillment on pollution and also on traffic congestion. And when we're talking about pollution, we're talking about CO2, we're talking about NOx gases, and also particulate matters. So you might be asking, so what is local fulfillment? Well, if we think about local fulfillment, this chart shows you kind of the 2 traditional fulfillment versus local fulfillment. Traditional is on the left, local fulfillment is on the right. Probably the simplest way I can define local fulfillment, it's essentially a model where the fulfillment center is much closer to the end recipient, right? So we're not talking about putting a fulfillment center on the outskirts, on the perimeter of an urban center, typically near an airport or in some kind of industrial park. We're talking about putting them inside communities, inside neighborhoods, okay? So very small radiuses. And as you can see here, we're talking about a 2-step process, or I guess when you compare it to The first one, you have, I guess, local fulfillment centers, which are much closer, and there's a step to get the items to these fulfillment centers, and then there's the actual local delivery. So what are the advantages of local fulfillment? And by the way, local fulfillment, you might also hear that as being, for example, delivery from store. You might have dark store delivery, and also we're starting to see micro fulfillment centers. That's all kind of part of the same family here. So what did we, I guess, model, and what were some of the benefits that came out of this? Well, number one is a shorter stem time. So the distance between the fulfillment center and the first delivery, that is greatly shortened. So that's number one. Number two is the ability to use smaller vehicles on last mile. So this allows you to use more economical vehicles. Number three is shorter travel distances on the last mile, so you don't have to do such a huge loop. And then finally, the ability, because of these smaller vehicles, to use greener alternatives when it comes to for example, using electric on vehicles, even using bicycles, and also we also modeled on-foot delivery or pickups, assuming that the item was close enough to the consumer. In addition to this, we also took into account the use of dynamic routing, which provided an additional 7 to 9% efficiency and in terms of shortening the route, greater route and drop density because you're packing more parcels on a per street basis, let's say, the demand and substitution effect from free and fast delivery, and then finally, the elimination of recipient trips to the mall. So assuming you have 100 parcels, and if everybody has to go and pick them up with a passenger vehicle, the round trip, it's much easier and much more efficient to use a vehicle like a small truck that does kind of a milk run and delivers them to the different recipients. So what did we find out? Well, our research showed that by using local fulfillment centers, we could expect a reduction of 17 to 26% in terms of emissions between 2020 and 2025. And these results were pretty much consistent across the cities, all three cities. But in addition to that, we also looked at traffic congestion. And what we found was that the delivery traffic would decrease by 13% in Chicago, 13% in London, and also 2% in Sydney. So you might be wondering, why 2%? Well, there are two factors here. Number one is that the infrastructure is less saturated in Sydney than in the other two larger cities. And then the second thing is in Australia, the e-commerce as a percent of total retail is much lower than in the other two cities. So that might explain that. But nevertheless, if you take the sum of all of the three cities, you get a total decrease of 264,000 tons of CO2 emissions that are avoided. So let's go to the next slide, because if we look at kind of what does it take to achieve an even faster, cheaper, greener last mile, this is not going to happen by itself. We came up with three factors, okay? Number one, we need to incentivize green or greener choices. Number two, we need to rethink asset use. And then finally, number three, we need to harness data and analytics. And all of these are possible. If we go back to the first one, a couple of examples. So, for example, when asked, 43% of consumers said that they were more likely to choose retailers that provide sustainable delivery options. So think about putting kind of a carbon indicator at the checkout and giving a few alternatives to the consumer. They can then make a more sound decision. In addition to that, if you think about governments, they can provide incentives and programs to try to encourage local delivery during off-peak hours, or even the sharing of routes, or one player does one neighborhood, another player does another. So those are some of the things that could be done to try to reduce overall traffic. Rethink asset use. For retailers, two questions. Think about, for retailers, can you use local fulfillment space or common local fulfillment space? So in this particular case, maybe a retailer by themselves cannot actually invest. They don't have the capital or the supply chain expertise, but together or in partnership, they can certainly explore, I guess, a common fulfillment center or shared warehousing as an option. And then for last mile carriers, postal or parcel organizations, they should consider sharing common infrastructure. So what is this? Well, it could be electric charging stations, for instance, which is apparently a big headache when it comes to and a big cost in terms of capital expenditure, or looking at sharing of pickup and drop off locations, aka PUDOs or parcel lockers, or even sharing of the fleet, or have them consolidate routes to further increase drop density. And then when it comes to harness data and analytics, uh, the more data you have of the demand, the more I guess, meet the demand with the right supply. So what that means is having the right number of drivers and vehicles, not too many, and also having the right vehicles, so you don't you're maximizing, I guess, the utilization of the space in terms of cubage in those vehicles. So that's one example. And then the other thing is with data, you can actually help improve route optimization, so traveling a lot less, and then also increasing the first-time delivery rates, which eliminates a lot of rework and a second attempt or a third attempt even in some cases, which means that in essence, with data, you have a better idea that the consumer is actually at home. The propensity to accept the parcel will be higher, and therefore you can work on that metric. So in summary, what I can tell you is it's possible to achieve a faster, cheaper, greener last mile, but it requires efforts, and efforts to rethink also the paradigms associated with how we deliver today. So we need to, again, incentivize green choices, rethink the asset use, and harness data and analytics. So, Sarah, I'll hand it over to you for some final words.
I mean, I think that's the most important thing in closing, right? That it is possible. The working group insights in the direction that we can take as a community to get there, the research that Andre just walked through to highlight what are the tangible few things, not that they're easy, but that they're possible, is something that we need to come behind as a community and take them forward. So, our ask is that with this opportunity to create a more sustainable last mile, let's take advantage of that. We know it will take a community of people. We're really happy to have this opportunity to be together with you as part of Movin'On. We encourage the continued collaboration as part of the community interest groups with this conference, and we look forward to staying engaged with all of you as stakeholders in this. This is a global opportunity that we believe that together we can really make a difference. So just appreciative to have this opportunity, Andre, with being able to speak with you as well.
Yeah, and I hope everybody enjoyed this and found this useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.